You won't believe what happened when a routine security check turned into a nightmare that changed everything. What seemed like just another day at the airport became a story of prejudice, abuse of power, and a shocking truth that nobody saw coming. A black woman in simple clothes approached what should have been a routine checkpoint procedure, but sometimes appearances can be deceiving in ways that will leave you speechless. This is a story about assumptions, consequences, and a revelation so shocking it will change how you see everything. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover will completely blow your mind. The fluorescent lights of Reagan National Airport buzzed overhead as Maya Johnson shifted the worn strap of her old canvas backpack and checked the cracked screen of her phone for the third time in 2 minutes. 6:47 a.m. Her flight to Miami was scheduled to depart at 7:30, and she still had to get through security. The early morning crowd was thinner than usual, but every second counted now. She had spent months preparing for this moment, and absolutely nothing could go wrong. Maya looked like she didn't belong in the polished environment of the airport terminal. Her faded jeans had seen better days, with small tears near the knees that spoke of wear rather than fashion. Her oversized hoodie was clean but clearly old, the kind of garment you might find at a thrift store or receive as a hand-me-down from a relative. Her sneakers were scuffed and practical, the kind worn by someone who walked everywhere rather than drove luxury cars. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no expensive styling or elaborate arrangements. She carried herself with quiet determination, but to the casual observer, she might have looked like someone who had scraped together money for this flight, perhaps visiting family or looking for work opportunities in a new city. Nothing about her appearance suggested wealth, status, or authority. But appearances, as they say, can be deceiving in the most extraordinary ways. What the other passengers and airport staff couldn't see was that Maya Johnson was actually Special Agent Maya Johnson of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. At 34, she had spent the last 8 years building a reputation as one of the most effective undercover agents in the Bureau's history. Her ability to blend into any environment, to become invisible in plain sight, had made her invaluable in operations that required absolute discretion. Today's mission was the culmination of a 2-year investigation into Marcus Valdez, a drug kingpin and human trafficking mastermind who had managed to stay one step ahead of federal agents across 3 states. Intelligence had finally placed him on Flight 1247 to Miami, traveling under a false identity. This was their chance, perhaps their only chance, to finally bring him to justice. Maya's unremarkable appearance was carefully calculated. She had spent weeks developing this persona, studying the mannerisms and clothing choices of someone who would be completely overlooked in an airport setting. The worn backpack contained sophisticated surveillance equipment disguised as everyday items. Her phone, despite its cracked screen, was loaded with encrypted communication software that kept her in contact with the tactical team already positioned in Miami. Most importantly, secured in a hidden compartment of her backpack, was her service weapon and federal credentials. The Transportation Security Administration had been notified of her presence through encrypted channels, but the operation required absolute discretion. Valdez had contacts everywhere, and one wrong move could send him underground again for years. As Maya approached the security checkpoint, she could feel the familiar weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She had successfully maintained her cover for months, building the background story of a woman struggling to make ends meet, someone who would be invisible to the criminal networks she was infiltrating. The airport was starting to wake up around her. Business travelers in expensive suits scrolled through their phones while balancing coffee cups and rolling premium luggage. Well-dressed families coordinated their travel plans near the check-in counters. Everyone seemed to belong in this world of air travel and professional mobility, everyone except Maya. She had deliberately chosen her flight time and route to blend in with morning commuters and business travelers, knowing that her unremarkable appearance would make her virtually invisible among the crowd. She was a frequent flyer under her cover identity, her background carefully constructed by the Bureau's technical team, and she had never encountered any problems before. But as she joined the security line, Something felt different. The TSA agent manning the document check station was someone she hadn't seen before, a blonde woman in her 40s who seemed to be examining certain passengers with unusual intensity. Agent Patricia Mills, according to her name tag, had the kind of rigid posture and stern expression that suggested she took her job very seriously, perhaps too seriously. Mills had been working for the TSA for only 6 months, transferred from a smaller regional airport where she had quickly gained a reputation for being thorough to the point of obsession. She prided herself on catching details that others missed, on being the first line of defense against threats that could slip through a more casual inspection. But her colleagues had begun to notice disturbing patterns in her behavior. The passengers she selected for additional screening seemed to share certain characteristics that had nothing to do with actual security threats. The questions she asked went far beyond standard protocol. The assumptions she made were based on factors like appearance, clothing, and skin color rather than legitimate security concerns. But Mills saw herself as a patriot, a guardian standing watch over American skies, and she wasn't going to apologize for being careful. Maya had encountered this type of profiling before in her career, both as an agent and in her personal life. She knew the look, the subtle shift in expression when someone decided that she didn't belong in a particular space or situation. But today's stakes were too high for this kind of complication. As Maya stepped forward and handed over her identification and boarding pass, she immediately noticed the change in Mills's expression. The TSA agent's eyes moved from the documents to Maya's appearance with obvious disapproval, taking in the worn clothes and scuffed shoes with barely concealed disdain. "Where are you traveling today?" Mills asked, though the boarding pass clearly showed the destination. But her tone suggested that she doubted Maya had any legitimate reason to be flying anywhere. "Miami," Maya replied, maintaining a respectful but unremarkable demeanor that matched her cover identity. Mills continued studying the documents with exaggerated care, as if searching for some inconsistency or fraud. "Business or pleasure?" "Visiting family," Maya said, which was part of her cover story. She had spent weeks developing the background of someone who might be traveling to see relatives in Florida. "Family?" Mills repeated, her tone suggesting skepticism. "And they couldn't afford to buy you a better plane ticket? This is coach seating in the back of the plane." The comment was inappropriate and irrelevant to security screening, but Maya maintained her composure. She had encountered worse during undercover operations, and she couldn't risk blowing her cover over a TSA agent's attitude problem. "It's what I could afford," Maya said simply, playing her role perfectly. Mills finally handed back the documents, but her expression made it clear that this interaction was far from over. As Maya moved toward the metal detector, she could feel the agent's eyes following her every movement, could sense the judgment and suspicion radiating from the woman. The X-ray machine operator, focused on his morning coffee, barely glanced at Maya's worn backpack as it disappeared into the machine. The bag looked so unremarkable, so clearly belonging to someone of limited means, that it didn't warrant a second look. But Mills had positioned herself at the exit of the metal detector, clearly intending to continue her scrutiny. Maya stepped through the detector without incident. No beeps, no alarms, no indication of any problem whatsoever. But as she moved toward the conveyor belt to collect her backpack, Mills stepped into her path with an expression that mixed authority with barely concealed contempt. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside for additional screening." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She checked her phone again, 7:02 a.m. 28 minutes until her flight departed. 28 minutes to complete what should have been a routine passage through security and get to her gate where Valdez would be boarding the same plane, completely unaware that his years of running were about to end. "Is there a problem with my bag?" Maya asked, her voice carrying just the right note of confusion and slight anxiety that someone in her supposed situation would naturally display. "Just routine," Mills replied, but her tone and body language suggested anything but routine. There was an eagerness in her expression, as if she had been waiting for an opportunity like this. "Follow me, please." As they walked toward a designated screening area, Maya could feel the eyes of other passengers following their movement. Some looked curious, others seemed uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, and a few appeared to be making their own assumptions about why a poorly dressed black woman was being singled out for special attention. The screening area was more private, separated from the main flow of passenger traffic by portable barriers. It was designed to allow TSA agents to conduct more thorough inspections without disrupting the overall security process, but to Maya, it felt like being put on public display for everyone to see and judge. Agent Mills approached the examination with an attitude that seemed more hostile than professional, as if she had already decided that this shabily dressed woman was guilty of something and just needed to find the evidence. "Let's see what we have here," Mills announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, reaching for Maya's worn backpack with exaggerated care, as if it might contain something dangerous or suspicious. Maya watched in growing concern as Mills began removing items one by one, handling each object as if it were evidence in a criminal investigation. A paperback novel with a cracked spine, a water bottle that had seen better days, a small bag of generic trail mix, items that perfectly matched the profile of someone traveling on a tight budget. "Interesting reading choice," Mills commented sarcastically, holding up the romance novel that Maya had selected specifically because it was the kind of book her cover identity would read. Not exactly intellectual material. The comment was completely inappropriate and irrelevant to security screening, but Maya maintained her composure. She had trained for situations like this, had learned to control her reactions even when facing the most provocative behavior. But inside, she could feel her frustration building as precious minutes ticked away. "I like to read on flights," Maya said simply, her voice carrying just the right note of mild defensiveness that someone in her supposed situation would naturally display. Mills continued her examination with deliberate slowness, clearly enjoying the exercise of authority over someone she perceived as powerless. She examined Maya's phone with particular interest, noting the cracked screen and outdated model. "This phone has seen better days," Mills observed. "Can't afford to replace it?" Maya bit back her first instinct to respond with the authority and confidence of a federal agent. Instead, she gave a small shrug that suggested embarrassment about her financial situation. "It still works fine." But Mills wasn't finished. She had found something that seemed to particularly capture her attention. A small leather folder that Maya carried as part of her cover identity. Inside were business cards for a cleaning service, part of the backstory that explained how someone like Maya might afford occasional air travel. "So you're a housekeeper," Mills said, not as a question, but as a statement loaded with condescension. She held up one of the business cards as if it were Exhibit A in a trial. "That explains a lot." The comment hung in the air, and Maya could see other passengers beginning to take notice of the interaction. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed to be pulling out their phones to record what was becoming an increasingly tense situation. "I clean offices," Maya corrected, maintaining her role but feeling her patience beginning to wear thin. Every second that passed was a second closer to missing her flight and losing Valdez forever. "Office buildings? Houses? What's the difference?" Mills said dismissively. "The question is, how does someone who cleans for a living afford to fly to Miami? That's not exactly a cheap destination." Maya felt her jaw tighten, but she forced herself to remain in character. "I saved up to visit my sister. She's having surgery." It was a perfect cover story, emotionally resonant and difficult to challenge without appearing heartless. But Mills seemed immune to any appeal to human decency. "Surgery?" Mills repeated skeptically. "And she couldn't help with the travel expenses? Or maybe there's another reason you're really going to Miami?" The implication was clear and deeply offensive. Mills was suggesting that Maya might be involved in drug trafficking or some other criminal activity, basing this assumption on nothing more than her appearance and perceived economic status. "I don't understand what you're suggesting," Maya said, her voice carrying a note of hurt confusion that was only partially acting. She had experienced this kind of profiling throughout her life, but it never got easier to endure. Mills leaned closer, her voice dropping to a tone that was meant to be intimidating. "I'm suggesting that maybe you should be more honest about why you're really traveling today. Because right now, nothing about your story is adding up for me." Maya checked her phone again. 7:12 a.m. 18 minutes until departure. She could feel the walls closing in around the operation, could sense that her carefully laid plans were beginning to unravel because of one person's prejudices and assumptions. "My story is the truth," Maya said firmly, allowing just a hint of her real personality to show through. "I'm visiting my sister, and I have every right to be on that plane." The slight shift in Maya's tone seemed to catch Mills's attention. For just a moment, the TSA agent looked uncertain, as if she had heard something in Maya's voice that didn't match her assumptions about who this woman was. But then Mills's expression hardened again, and she reached for Maya's backpack with renewed determination. "We'll see about that. I'm going to need to do a complete search of your bag and your person." Maya felt her heart sink. A complete search would inevitably lead to the discovery of her concealed weapon and federal credentials. Once that happened, her cover would be blown, the operation would be compromised, and Valdez would slip through their fingers once again. "Is that really necessary?" Maya asked, playing for time while her mind raced through possible options. "I've cooperated with everything you've asked." "It's necessary because I say it's necessary," Mills replied with obvious satisfaction. "And if you have nothing to hide, then you shouldn't have any problem with it." Maya could see other TSA agents beginning to take notice of the extended screening process. Some looked curious, others appeared uncomfortable with Mills's approach, but none seemed inclined to intervene. The unspoken hierarchy of the security checkpoint meant that Mills was in charge of this situation, regardless of how inappropriate her behavior might seem. As Mills reached for the backpack again, Maya made a split-second decision. She couldn't allow the search to continue without risking everything, but she also couldn't reveal her true identity without potentially compromising the entire operation. She needed to find a middle ground, a way to assert some authority without blowing her cover completely. "Ma'am," Maya said, her voice taking on a slightly different tone, one that carried hints of the confidence and authority she usually wielded as a federal agent. "I think there may be some confusion here about who you're dealing with." Mills paused, her hands still on the backpack, but her expression showed she had noticed the change in Maya's demeanor. For the first time since the interaction began, the TSA agent looked slightly uncertain. "What's that supposed to mean?" Mills asked, but her voice lacked some of its earlier confidence. Maya looked directly into Mills's eyes, allowing just a glimpse of her true self to show through the carefully constructed cover identity. "It means that maybe you should think very carefully about your next move." The words carried weight and authority that seemed to catch Mills off guard. Other passengers were beginning to gather at a respectful distance, sensing that something significant was happening, but unable to hear the specifics of the conversation. Maya checked her phone one more time. 7:15 a.m. 15 minutes until departure. 15 minutes to either salvage this operation or watch 2 years of work disappear because of one person's prejudices. But something had shifted in the dynamic between the two women. Mills was still holding the backpack, still technically in control of the situation, but Maya's subtle assertion of authority had introduced an element of doubt into the interaction. "I don't care who you think you are," Mills said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're going through additional screening whether you like it or not." Maya took a deep breath, realizing that she was approaching a point of no return. In a few moments, she would have to make a choice that could determine not just the success of this operation, but potentially the safety of countless victims who were depending on Valdez being brought to justice. The checkpoint around them seemed to pause, as if everyone sensed that something important was about to happen. Maya could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of a decision that would ripple far beyond this sterile airport security area. And in that moment of suspended tension, with Mills reaching for her backpack and time running out, Maya prepared to reveal a truth that would shock everyone present and change the course of everything that followed. The tension in the secondary screening area had reached a breaking point, and Maya could feel the eyes of dozens of passengers now focused on the unfolding drama. What had started as a routine security check had transformed into something much more significant, though none of the observers could have guessed the true stakes involved. Mills's hands trembled slightly as she continued her aggressive examination of Maya's belongings, but there was something different in her expression now. The confident superiority she had displayed earlier was being replaced by a growing uncertainty, as if she sensed that this interaction was spiraling beyond her control. "I'm going to need you to remove your shoes," Mills announced, her voice still attempting to project authority but lacking the conviction it had carried earlier. Maya complied without argument, slipping off her worn sneakers and placing them on the metal examination table. She watched as Mills inspected them with exaggerated thoroughness, turning them over and examining the soles as if they might contain hidden compartments or suspicious materials. "These shoes have seen a lot of miles," Mills commented, her tone still condescending but with a hint of uncertainty creeping in. "Where exactly have you been walking in these?" "Work, mostly," Maya replied, maintaining her cover identity while fighting the growing urge to end this charade and reveal who she really was. "I'm on my feet most of the day." But Maya's patience was wearing dangerously thin, and Mills seemed to sense the change in her demeanor. There was something in Maya's posture, in the way she held herself during this humiliating process, that didn't quite match the profile of a powerless woman being intimidated by authority. A supervisor had begun to take notice of the extended screening process. Agent Rodriguez, a 20-year TSA veteran, approached the screening area with a concerned expression. He had worked with Mills for several months and had grown increasingly uncomfortable with her screening methods and the patterns in her behavior. "Everything okay here, Mills?" Rodriguez asked, his tone carefully neutral, but his eyes taking in the scene with obvious concern. "Just conducting a thorough screening," Mills replied, but her voice carried a defensive edge. "This passenger's story isn't adding up." Rodriguez looked at Maya, taking in her simple clothes and worn backpack, then back at Mills. "What seems to be the problem?" "She claims to be visiting family in Miami, but look at her," Mills said, gesturing dismissively at Maya's appearance. "Does she look like someone who can afford to just fly across the country for a family visit? Something doesn't add up." Maya felt her jaw clench at the blatant profiling, but she forced herself to remain in character. She could see Rodriguez's uncomfortable expression, could tell that he understood exactly what was happening here and didn't approve of it. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said to Maya, his tone respectful and professional, "I apologize for any inconvenience. We just need to complete this screening process and then you can be on your way." But Mills wasn't finished. She had found something else in Maya's backpack that had captured her attention. A small electronic device that was actually sophisticated surveillance equipment disguised as a portable phone charger. "What's this?" Mills asked, suspiciously, holding up the device and examining it closely. "It's a phone charger," Maya replied truthfully, though the device was capable of much more than charging phones. "This looks expensive for someone in your situation," Mills observed, her confidence seeming to return as she found what she perceived as inconsistencies in Maya's story. "Where did you get money for high-end electronics?" Maya could feel the situation reaching a critical point. Every minute that passed brought her closer to missing her flight and losing Valdez forever. She had to find a way to end this confrontation without completely blowing her cover, but Mills seemed determined to continue the harassment. "It was a gift," Maya said simply, but she could see that Mills wasn't going to accept any explanation that didn't fit her preconceived notions. "A gift from who?" Mills pressed. "And why would someone give you such an expensive present?" The questions were becoming increasingly invasive and inappropriate, and Maya could see other passengers beginning to pull out their phones to record the interaction. Some looked angry at what they were witnessing, others seemed uncomfortable, but everyone could sense that something was very wrong with this situation. Rodriguez stepped closer to Mills, his expression showing clear disapproval. "Mills, I think you've been thorough enough. Let's wrap this up." But Mills ignored her supervisor, her attention focused entirely on Maya with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She had convinced herself that she was on the verge of uncovering something significant, some conspiracy or criminal activity that would vindicate her aggressive approach. "I'm not done with my screening," Mills declared, reaching for Maya's backpack again with renewed determination. "I have a right to conduct a complete and thorough examination." Maya checked her phone. 7:18 a.m. 12 minutes until departure. 12 minutes to save an operation that had taken 2 years to develop and execute. She could feel her professional composure beginning to crack under the pressure of the situation and the relentless harassment she was enduring. "Ma'am?" Maya said, her voice taking on a harder edge that didn't match her supposed background. "I think you need to be very careful about how you proceed from here." The warning came out with an authority and confidence that surprised everyone within earshot, including Maya herself. For a moment, the carefully constructed cover identity slipped, revealing just a glimpse of the federal agent beneath. Mills paused, her hands still on the backpack, but her expression showed that she had definitely noticed the change in Maya's demeanor. The TSA agent looked confused and slightly intimidated by the sudden shift in the dynamic between them. "Are you threatening me?" Mills asked, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "I'm advising you," Maya replied, her tone carrying unmistakable authority. "Think very carefully about your next move." Rodriguez was watching the exchange with growing concern. He had heard something in Maya's voice that didn't match her appearance or supposed background, something that suggested there was much more to this woman than met the eye. Other passengers were beginning to gather at the edges of the screening area, drawn by the increasingly tense confrontation. Some were openly recording the interaction on their phones, others were making comments about the obvious profiling taking place, and a few seemed to be waiting for the situation to escalate further. Maya could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on her, could sense that the entire checkpoint area was holding its breath waiting to see what would happen next. She was balanced on a knife's edge between maintaining her cover and protecting the operation, or revealing her true identity and dealing with the consequences. Mills seemed to sense that she was losing control of the situation, but instead of backing down, she doubled down on her aggressive approach. "I don't care who you think you are or what kind of attitude you want to give me. You're going through additional screening whether you like it or not." Maya took a deep breath, feeling the moment of decision approaching rapidly. In her earpiece, barely audible to anyone else, she could hear the voice of her handler providing updates on the operation. Valdez was already at the gate, preparing to board the flight. Time was running out. "Agent Mills," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying a weight of authority that seemed to fill the entire screening area, "I strongly recommend that you step back and reconsider your approach to this situation." The use of Mills's title, combined with the unmistakable tone of command in Maya's voice, created a moment of stunned silence in the checkpoint. Everyone present could sense that something significant was happening, though most couldn't understand exactly what. Mills stared at Maya with a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. Something fundamental had shifted in their interaction, and the TSA agent was beginning to realize that she might have made a serious mistake in her assessment of who she was dealing with. Something had fundamentally changed in her posture, in her voice, in the very air around her. Mills was staring at Maya with growing confusion and alarm. The confident superiority she had displayed throughout the screening process was rapidly crumbling, replaced by uncertainty and the dawning realization that she might have seriously misjudged the situation. "What did you just call me?" Mills asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Agent Mills," Maya repeated, her tone carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command situations. "That is your title, isn't it? Transportation Security Administration Agent Patricia Mills?" The formal use of Mills's full title and position, delivered with such precision and authority, sent a chill through the surrounding area. Rodriguez stepped closer, his expression showing that he understood something significant was happening, even if he couldn't yet grasp the full scope of it. Maya could feel her carefully constructed cover identity continuing to slip away, piece by piece. Every second that passed brought her closer to a complete revelation that would change everything. But she was also running out of options, running out of time, and running out of patience with this harassment. "How do you know my full name?" Mills demanded, but her voice carried none of its earlier confidence. For the first time since the interaction began, she seemed genuinely intimidated. Maya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached slowly into her jacket pocket, her movements deliberate and controlled. Mills tensed, clearly expecting some kind of confrontation, but what Maya produced was something that made the TSA agent's face go pale. It was a business card, but not the cleaning service cards that Mills had examined earlier. This card was made of heavier stock, with the distinctive blue and gold design that was immediately recognizable to anyone who worked in law enforcement or federal security. Maya held the card between two fingers, not yet handing it over but letting Mills see enough to recognize what it represented. The FBI seal was clearly visible, along with text that identified the bearer as a special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "My name is Special Agent Maya Johnson," she said quietly, her voice carrying across the checkpoint area despite its low volume. "And you have just made one of the biggest mistakes of your career." The revelation hit the checkpoint like a physical shockwave. Passengers who had been recording the interaction gasped audibly. Rodriguez's eyes widened in shock and what looked like growing horror as he began to understand the implications of what had just transpired, but Mills seemed unable to process what she was hearing. She stared at the FBI credentials as if they were written in a foreign language, her mind struggling to reconcile the image of the poorly dressed woman she had been harassing with the federal agent standing before her. "That's impossible," Mills said, but her voice lacked conviction. You're wearing old clothes. You said you were a housekeeper, I said I cleaned offices," Maya corrected, her tone now carrying the full authority of her position. "Which is exactly what I do. I clean up the messes that people like Marcus Valdez leave behind." The mention of Valdez's name caused Rodriguez to take a sharp breath. Even though he wasn't directly involved in federal law enforcement, he recognized the name from news reports and interagency bulletins. Valdez was one of the most wanted fugitives in the country. Maya checked her phone again. 7:21 a.m. 9 minutes until departure. 9 minutes to salvage an operation that was disintegrating because of one person's prejudices and assumptions. "Agent Rodriguez," Maya said, addressing the supervisor directly, "I need you to contact your federal liaison immediately and verify my credentials. The authentication code is Bravo 77 Alpha November." Rodriguez nodded quickly, pulling out his radio to make the call. His hands were shaking slightly as he realized the magnitude of what had just occurred under his supervision. Mills was still staring at Maya's credentials, her face growing paler by the second. "But you look like, your clothes." "My clothes are part of an undercover operation that you have now compromised," Maya said, her voice cold and professional. "An operation that has been in development for 2 years and was scheduled to culminate this morning." The full weight of the situation was beginning to dawn on Mills. She had not only racially profiled and harassed a federal agent, but she had potentially destroyed a major law enforcement operation in the process. "I didn't know," Mills stammered, but Maya cut her off with a sharp gesture. "You didn't know because you made assumptions based on my appearance rather than following proper security protocols," Maya said. "You saw a black woman in old clothes and decided she must be a criminal or a threat." Other TSA agents had begun gathering around the screening area, drawn by the commotion and the growing crowd of passengers. Word was spreading quickly through the checkpoint that something extraordinary was happening. Maya's radio crackled softly with an update from her team. Valdez was boarding the plane. The target was moving toward the aircraft, unaware that his primary pursuer was trapped in a security checkpoint, being harassed by someone who was supposed to be on the same side. "Agent Johnson," Rodriguez said, approaching with obvious trepidation. "Your credentials have been verified. I am so sorry for this situation. What can we do to help?" Maya looked at her phone. 7:23 a.m., 7 minutes until departure. It might still be possible to make the flight if she moved immediately, but the damage to the operation was already significant. "I need to get to Gate C12 immediately," Maya said, "and I need Agent Mills to understand that her actions may have just allowed one of the most dangerous criminals in America to escape justice." Mills had sunk onto a nearby chair, her face buried in her hands. The magnitude of her mistake was becoming clear, and she seemed to be struggling to process the implications of what had happened. "But I was just doing my job," Mills said weakly, looking up at Maya with tears in her eyes. "I was trying to protect people." "No," Maya said firmly, her voice carrying the weight of years of experience dealing with the consequences of prejudice and assumptions. "You were profiling me based on my race and appearance. There's a difference between security and discrimination, and you crossed that line the moment you decided I didn't belong in this airport." The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, and many were still recording the interaction on their phones. Maya realized that this confrontation was likely to become public, adding another layer of complication to an already complex situation. Rodriguez was coordinating with other security personnel, trying to clear a path for Maya to reach her gate. But precious minutes had been lost, and everyone present understood that time was running out. "Agent Johnson," Rodriguez said, "we have a security cart ready to take you to your gate. We can get you there in 3 minutes." Maya nodded, grabbing her backpack and preparing to leave. But as she turned to go, she looked back at Mills one final time. "Agent Mills," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of authority and disappointment, "I hope you'll take some time to think about what happened here today, about the assumptions you made and the consequences of those assumptions. Because the next time you decide someone doesn't belong somewhere based on how they look, you might be making an even bigger mistake." As Maya hurried toward the security cart, she could hear the murmur of voices behind her. Passengers were discussing what they had witnessed. TSA agents were trying to understand how such a situation had occurred, and Mills was sitting in stunned silence, finally beginning to grasp the full scope of her actions. The cart raced through the airport corridors, weaving between passengers and obstacles as Maya checked her phone repeatedly. 7:25 a.m., 7:26 a.m., 7:27 a.m. Each minute that passed reduced the chances of completing the mission successfully. But as they approached Gate C-12, Maya could see that the boarding process was nearly complete. Passengers were filing onto the aircraft, and ground crew were preparing for departure. Valdez would be somewhere in that line, invisible among the other travelers, unaware that his years of running were supposed to end today. Maya reached the gate just as the final boarding call was announced. She flashed her credentials to the gate agent and rushed down the jetway, her heart pounding as she realized that she had managed to make the flight despite the delay. But as she settled into her seat and looked around the cabin, a cold realization settled over her. In all the chaos and confrontation at the security checkpoint, in all the time lost dealing with Mills' harassment and prejudice, something crucial had gone wrong. The seat that intelligence had indicated would be occupied by Marcus Valdez was empty. The target was not on the plane. The empty seat stared back at Maya like a void that represented 2 years of wasted work, countless hours of investigation, and the freedom of one of America's most dangerous criminals. As the plane's engines began their pre-flight sequence, she pulled out her encrypted phone and contacted her handler with trembling fingers. "Control, this is Nightingale," she said quietly, using her operational code name. "Target is not on board. Repeat, Valdez is not on the aircraft." The voice that came back through her earpiece was tight with concern. "Nightingale, please confirm. Intelligence placed him on Flight 1247 with absolute certainty." Maya looked around the cabin one more time, her trained eyes scanning every passenger, every face, every detail. But there was no doubt. Marcus Valdez, the man they had been hunting for 2 years, the criminal mastermind responsible for countless deaths and destroyed lives, was not on this plane. "Confirmed, Control. The target is not here. Something went wrong." As the plane began to taxi toward the runway, Maya's mind raced through the possibilities. Had Valdez spotted surveillance? Had their intelligence been compromised? Or had something else entirely derailed the operation? The answer came through her earpiece minutes later, and it hit her like a physical blow. "Nightingale, we have confirmation that the target boarded American Airlines Flight 891 to Mexico City instead. Departure time was 7:32 a.m. The flight is already airborne. Maya felt the blood drain from her face. 7:32 a.m., 2 minutes after her scheduled flight to Miami. While she was trapped in a security checkpoint being harassed and humiliated by Agent Mills, Marcus Valdez had calmly walked to a different gate and boarded a plane to a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. "How is that possible?" Maya whispered into her phone. "Our intelligence was solid." Valdez had a backup plan we didn't know about. He was monitoring law enforcement communications and changed his flight when he detected increased federal activity at the airport. But Nightingale, the timeline suggests that if you had been at your surveillance position as scheduled, we would have tracked the change and intercepted him before he reached the alternate gate. The words hit Maya like bullets. If she had been where she was supposed to be, instead of being detained and humiliated by a TSA agent who decided she looked suspicious, they would have caught Valdez. The operation would have succeeded. Justice would have been served. Instead, one of America's most wanted criminals was now flying toward freedom, toward a country where he could continue his operations with impunity, where the victims he had yet to claim would never receive the protection they deserved. Maya sat back in her seat, the full weight of the situation crashing down on her. 2 years of undercover work, months of careful planning, dozens of federal agents coordinating across multiple states, all of it destroyed by 25 minutes of racial profiling and harassment at a security checkpoint. The plane was now airborne, carrying Maya toward Miami, and a mission that no longer existed. Below them, she could see the lights of Washington, D.C. fading into the distance, and with them, any hope of capturing Marcus Valdez in the foreseeable future. Her phone buzzed with another message from her handler. "Nightingale, we need a full debrief on what caused the delay. The operation failure will require a complete investigation." Maya stared at the message, knowing that she would have to explain how Agent Patricia Mills's prejudices and assumptions had single-handedly destroyed one of the most important federal operations of the year. She would have to describe the humiliation, the harassment, the precious minutes lost to ignorance and bias. But more importantly, she would have to live with the knowledge of what that delay had cost. Marcus Valdez would continue to operate his drug trafficking and human smuggling networks. More young women would be kidnapped and sold into slavery. More communities would be destroyed by the poison he distributed. More families would be torn apart by violence and addiction, all because a TSA agent looked at a black woman in simple clothes and decided she didn't belong in an airport. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Maya allowed herself to think about the victims, who would never receive justice now, the families who would never get closure, the communities that would continue to suffer while Valdez operated from the safety of a non-extradition country. She thought about the 14-year-old girl they had found during a raid 6 months ago, barely alive after months of captivity in one of Valdez's trafficking operations. The girl had been too traumatized to speak, but her eyes had held a desperate hope that the people who had rescued her would make sure the man responsible could never hurt anyone else. That hope had died today in a sterile airport security checkpoint. Maya's phone rang, interrupting her dark thoughts. The caller ID showed her supervisor's number. "Agent Johnson, I just received word about what happened at the checkpoint," Assistant Director Sarah Chen said without preamble. "Are you all right?" "Physically, yes, ma'am," Maya replied. "But the operation is compromised. Valdez is in the wind." "I know. We're already coordinating with international agencies, but our chances of apprehending him now are minimal." There was a pause. "Maya, I need you to know that what happened to you today was completely unacceptable. The TSA agent's behavior was discriminatory and unprofessional. That TSA agent's behavior cost us 2 years of work and potentially countless lives," Maya said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Agent Mills decided I was suspicious because I'm black and wasn't wearing expensive clothes. That's the reality we're dealing with. I understand your frustration, and I want you to know that we will be filing formal complaints with TSA leadership. This kind of profiling cannot be tolerated, especially when it interferes with federal operations." But Maya knew that formal complaints and bureaucratic processes wouldn't bring back the victims who would suffer while Valdez remained free. They wouldn't undo the damage that had been done or restore the years of work that had been lost. Ma'am, with respect, filing complaints won't put Valdez behind bars. It won't save the people he's going to hurt while he's operating from Mexico. You're right, Director Chen said quietly. It won't. But it might prevent this from happening to another agent in the future. As Maya ended the call, she realized that her story was about to become more than just a personal experience of discrimination. It would become a case study in how prejudice and assumptions could have far-reaching consequences, how split-second judgments based on appearance could derail critical operations and endanger innocent lives. The plane began its descent into Miami, where Maya would spend the next several hours in debriefings and reports, documenting every detail of what had gone wrong. She would have to relive the humiliation, the harassment, the growing desperation as precious minutes ticked away. But she would also have to live with something else. The knowledge that somewhere in Mexico, Marcus Valdez was celebrating his narrow escape, completely unaware that his freedom had been purchased with the prejudices of a TSA agent who couldn't see past the color of a federal agent's skin and the simplicity of her clothes. As the wheels touched down on the Miami runway, Maya made a silent promise to the victims she had failed to save today. This wasn't over. The operation might have failed, but the hunt for Marcus Valdez would continue. And next time, she would be ready for more than just the criminals she was chasing. She would be ready for the prejudices and assumptions that could be just as dangerous as any weapon in a criminal's arsenal. Back at Reagan National Airport, Agent Patricia Mills sat in her supervisor's office, facing a panel of TSA officials and FBI representatives. The video footage from the checkpoint had been reviewed, witness statements had been taken, and the full scope of her actions was becoming clear. "Agent Mills," the lead investigator said, "can you explain your decision to detain Agent Johnson for extended screening?" Mills looked down at her hands, her earlier confidence completely gone. She looked suspicious. Her clothes were old. She said she was visiting family, but she was flying alone. The ticket was coach seating. "So you profiled her based on her appearance and economic status?" "I was being thorough," Mills said weakly, but even she could hear how hollow the words sounded. "Agent Mills, are you aware that your thoroughness has resulted in the failure of a major federal operation? That a dangerous criminal is now free because of the delay you caused?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Mills felt the full weight of her actions settling on her shoulders. She had convinced herself that she was protecting people, that her vigilance was keeping America safe. Instead, she had done exactly the opposite. "I didn't know she was an FBI agent," Mills said, tears starting to form in her eyes. "You shouldn't have needed to know that," the investigator replied. Agent Johnson was following all proper procedures, had valid identification, and posed no security threat. Your decision to detain her was based entirely on discriminatory assumptions. As the investigation continued, the ripple effects of that morning's events were spreading far beyond the airport. News outlets were picking up the story, civil rights organizations were demanding accountability, and federal agencies were reviewing their protocols for interagency coordination. But for Maya Johnson, flying back to Washington on a later flight, the personal cost was still being calculated. She had joined the FBI to protect people, to bring dangerous criminals to justice, to make the world a safer place. Today, she had been reminded that sometimes the greatest obstacles to that mission came not from the criminals themselves, but from the prejudices and assumptions of people who were supposed to be on the same side. The empty seat beside her on the return flight seemed to mock the failure of the day's mission. Somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico, Marcus Valdez was probably already planning his next operation, secure in the knowledge that American law enforcement couldn't touch him in his new sanctuary. And in a TSA break room at Reagan National Airport, Patricia Mills was cleaning out her locker, her career in shambles and her actions under federal investigation. She had learned too late that assumptions based on appearance could have consequences far beyond her imagination. The story that had begun with a routine security check had become something much larger, a reminder that prejudice and profiling don't just hurt the people who experience them directly. They can derail critical operations, endanger innocent lives, and allow dangerous criminals to escape justice. As Maya's plane descended toward Washington, she looked out at the city lights below and wondered how many other operations had been compromised by similar incidents. How many other federal agents had faced discrimination that interfered with their duties? How many victims had paid the price for someone else's prejudices? The questions would haunt her long after the official reports were filed and the administrative reviews were completed. Because Maya Johnson knew that this story wasn't really about one TSA agent's poor judgment or one failed operation. It was about something much deeper and more pervasive, the way assumptions and prejudices could literally change the course of history, one discriminatory decision at a time. Maya Johnson's experience represents something that happens far too often in our society. People are judged not by their character, their qualifications, or their actions, but by their skin color, their clothes, their perceived economic status, or other superficial factors. And as we've seen in this story, those judgments can have consequences that extend far beyond the immediate humiliation or inconvenience. Think about the ripple effects of that 25-minute delay at the security checkpoint. Marcus Valdez, a man responsible for drug trafficking networks that destroy communities and human trafficking operations that enslave vulnerable people, is now free to continue his criminal enterprise from a country where American law enforcement can't reach him. How many young women will be kidnapped and sold into slavery because of his continued operations? How many families will be torn apart by the drugs he distributes? How many communities will suffer violence and corruption because this one man was allowed to escape? These aren't abstract consequences. They represent real human suffering that could have been prevented if Agent Patricia Mills had simply followed standard security procedures instead of allowing her prejudices to drive her decision-making. But Maya's story also represents something else. The incredible professionalism and restraint shown by someone who was being humiliated and harassed while trying to do her job. She could have revealed her identity earlier, could have used her authority to end the harassment immediately. But she understood that her mission was bigger than her personal dignity, that catching Valdez was more important than her own comfort. The fact that she maintained her cover for as long as she did, even while being subjected to discriminatory treatment, speaks to the dedication and sacrifice that federal agents make every day in their efforts to protect the public. They put their personal feelings aside, they endure hardships and dangers, and they do whatever it takes to complete their missions. Unfortunately, in this case, that dedication and sacrifice wasn't enough to overcome the obstacles created by one person's prejudices. This story should make us all think about our own assumptions and biases. How often do we look at someone and make judgments based on their appearance? How often do we decide someone doesn't belong in a particular space or situation based on superficial factors rather than actual evidence? And for those of us in positions of authority, whether as TSA agents, police officers, teachers, employers, or in any other role where our decisions affect other people's lives, this story should serve as a reminder of how much power we wield and how careful we need to be in exercising that power. Agent Patricia Mills thought she was doing her job when she decided to give Maya Johnson additional scrutiny. She probably told herself she was being thorough, being careful, protecting the traveling public. But what she was really doing was allowing her unconscious biases to override her professional training and judgment. The result wasn't just a personal embarrassment or a discrimination incident. It was the failure of a major federal operation and the escape of a dangerous criminal who will continue to cause immeasurable harm while operating from his safe haven in Mexico. This is why diversity and inclusion training isn't just about being politically correct or making people feel good. It's about recognizing that our biases and assumptions can have real consequences. Sometimes consequences that extend far beyond what we can imagine in the moment we make a biased decision. Maya Johnson's story is also a reminder of the ongoing challenges faced by people of color in professional settings. Despite her extensive training, her federal credentials, her years of service protecting the American public, she was still subjected to discrimination based on her appearance and assumptions about her background. How many other qualified, dedicated professionals have faced similar treatment? How many operations, projects, and opportunities have been compromised because someone in authority decided that a person of color didn't belong in a particular space or role? The answer is probably far more than we'd like to acknowledge, and each of those incidents represents not just personal injustice, but a loss to our entire society. When we allow prejudice to override merit, when we make assumptions based on appearance rather than qualifications, we don't just hurt individuals. We hurt ourselves by failing to utilize the talents and contributions of all our citizens. As I finish telling you this story, I want you to think about the lessons it contains. Think about the importance of treating every person with dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived background. Think about the consequences of allowing biases and assumptions to drive your decision-making. And think about the dedication of people like Maya Johnson, federal agents, and law enforcement officers who put their lives on the line every day to protect the rest of us, often while facing discrimination and prejudice in their professional and personal lives. These are the people who stand between us and the Marcus Valdezes of the world. They deserve our support, our respect, and our commitment to creating a society where they can do their jobs without facing additional obstacles created by prejudice and bias. What do you think about this story? Have you ever witnessed or experienced similar discrimination? Do you think enough is being done to address profiling and bias in our security agencies and other institutions? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story made you think, if it opened your eyes to issues you hadn't considered before, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that explore the complex social issues we face in our modern world. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next video, where we'll be sharing another incredible true story that will challenge your assumptions and make you see the world in a new way. Until next time, remember that every person you encounter has a story, and that story might be far more complex and important than you could ever imagine from their appearance alone. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.